Yeah, so thanks for joining today. I love talking about data, so hopefully you love hearing about it as much as I like to talk about it. So we're going to talk about how to gather, analyze, and utilize the data that you have in your schools. And in case we've never crossed paths before, my name's Angie Ness. I live up here in Elkhart. I was a school counselor. I have experience at all levels. Most of it is in elementary. I did spend a couple of years at the middle school level during COVID, so that was a whole thing. And then I ended up just doing a year at the high school level. I'm a ramp reviewer, so any questions about that come up, you can ask. I do have graduate certificates in applied educational neuroscience and mental health counseling, so you'll see some of that weaved through here as well. I'm a doctoral candidate in counselor education and supervision, and currently my day job is working for Hatching Results as a professional learning specialist. So this is the kind of stuff that I talk about pretty often. So the objectives that I'm hoping to get through today is helping you identify data that's useful for informing your school counseling services, how to analyze what the root cause of barriers are to student success, and then determining student-centered and system-centered interventions that are appropriate to the identified needs. Before we start,
it's like a webinar. It's on Steve Carter. Oh yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just kind of curious what your comfort level is using data. So thinking about what you see with those icons, which number kind of relates to your comfort level using data at your schools? You can go ahead and put that in the chat. Or you can unmute and share. So a little confusion from Crystal and Cami. Anybody else? All right. Well, hopefully I'll get you a little closer to 1, and hopefully we're not feeling like Libby by the time I'm done. Okay, so love collecting the data, get stuck with what to do with it. So hopefully this is going to be helpful today. So I'm going to take you through how I've used data and then give you some resources along the way as well. So when I first started in a school, I mean, my grad program was great about talking about needing to use data and disaggregating data, but they really didn't tell me how to do that. So I kind of walked in and tried to figure out what data I had access to. So of course I had student information system data. We had PowerSchool, which gave me achievement, attendance, and discipline. I had counseling referrals, which wasn't the greatest data, but they were there. They came from students, they came from families, they came from staff. And then I had that informal data. So conversations I had with staff and families, conversations I had with students, and things that I observed from the students. So I really had to figure out how I was going to use this data. One of the things I wanted to try to do was connect it to the school improvement plan, because we know that as long as our comprehensive school counseling program is connected to school improvement and what's important to our administrators, we're more likely to get some ideas or some buy-in from our admin, which goes a long way. So I had to look at my SIP. First, I had to get access. I don't know about you guys, but getting access to the SIP is pretty difficult sometimes, even though it's supposed to be available. So identifying goals that are important to the school, figuring out what data I needed to use to align myself to those goals, and then also figuring out how the school counseling program and myself as a school counselor could contribute to those goals. So a lot of times these are the goals that you see in your SIP, like your ELA iLearn, your math iLearn. And this is where a lot of school counselors get stuck too. So if it were you and these are your school's goals, how do you think the counseling program could contribute to meeting those goals? So again, feel free to use the chat or unmute and share. No wrong answers. And if you don't know, you can say you don't know. Okay, I'm going to assume that maybe we're not quite sure. So of course, we're not academic interventionists. That's not our thing. That's not how we're trained. But when I looked at these things, we know that there are underlying reasons that students aren't meeting benchmarks for things like ILM, right? Maybe they're not coming to school. Okay, so Crystal, run data on students with failing grades, check to make sure they have some sort of intervention or remediation. True, so we can check to make sure they're connected to resources, but we could also kind of look at those underlying reasons. Are they not coming to school, right? So if there's an attendance issue that's contributing to it, as school counselors, those are things that we can talk to them about and work with them on and provide them resources for that, or even some small group counseling. Maybe they're in the office a lot. So again, figuring out what the issue is with why they might be in the office, doing some small groups, check in, check out, maybe even talking with teachers to talk about how they discipline. Also, just maybe they're not engaged with school. They don't know that school is important. So there are some things that we can do within a school counseling lens to kind of affect some of these more academic goals that may not at first glance seem to relate to school counseling. The other thing I want to do is a lot of times we get a lot of access to data, and like I think it was Crystal was saying, not quite sure what to do with it next or where to start. Like sometimes we get lost in the data because there's so much. So when I was a school counselor here in Elkhart County, we received the Lilly grant. And so one of the things that we did is we identified data metrics that we are going to look at every single quarter or every certain time periods during the school year to make sure that we are finding those kids before they knew that they needed help, but also to kind of narrow down what we're looking at. So it's not like I have all of my SIS data and all of the other data, and I'm just kind of weeding through all of the stuff and trying to figure out what to do. I know exactly what I'm going to look at. So of course, we always looked at attendance, achievement, and behavior because that was the most important thing to the schools. And so for instance, in middle school, we would look at students that had less than 95% attendance rate. We would look every grading period. And sometimes we would start in the first 20 days just to catch those kids before it got to be a big issue. We would look at kids failing 2 or more courses. We would look at kids that had 3 or more office referrals. So this was a gauge to help us kind of narrow down what we're looking at and also catch those kids before their issues became bigger than what we could handle. So something with Hatching Results that's a free resource that you can click on here on the slide is a way to help you look at data metrics and decide what data metrics your school counseling program wants to use. So if you click into it, you can see there's a lot of pre-populated things related to attendance, achievement, and behavior. Check marks about what you want to look at. Do you want to look at 2 or more Fs? Do you want to look at less than 80% attendance? Do you want to look at missing 3 or more days? Whatever that is, it kind of helps you guide and plan what you want to do. So hopefully that is going to be helpful for you in the future when you start looking at data and you're not quite sure where to start. So for me, I did go by our data metrics that we had in Elkhart, and I figured out or got help with gathering the reports that are available in PowerSchool, right? So I could get reports about students failing. I could get reports about attendance rates and absences. I could get reports about how many times they've been referred to the office. And I would put them all into this dashboard here. So it was a quick, easy way for me to see who those students are that are kind of meeting those benchmarks that need a little extra help. So you can see how they're highlighted here. And then I would just aggregate it and look for trends. So you see this is and this is based on some of the data that I had at one of my last schools. I could easily see where these students are. If I wanted to filter out by, say, the students that had 3 or more absences, I could easily see who those were. 75 kids, that's a lot. So I could even narrow it down to the ones that had 2 or more office referrals. And so now I have a nice small group that's easy to work with, that's based on data. The other thing that I would used to do is kind of look for the disproportionate student groups that are being referred to the office or who are failing classes. And so I could make it so I could highlight and see who those student groups are, because then we're talking about a systems issue, right? So we know that ideally we don't have we know that our Black African American students aren't more likely to fail. But if they're showing that they're more likely to fail in my school, I know that's an issue I need to talk with my administrators about. I also used to disaggregate it by teacher. And that was really important because depending on the teacher, they may have contributed to, their grading practices may have contributed to students failing. I know there's a district that I worked with in California, when they disaggregated their failing grades in algebra by teacher, they found out that 80% of their Fs in algebra were just from one teacher. So it's really important to look at those student groups and those subgroups to make sure that we are not treating students inappropriately based on the student group that they're in. So, little discussion. I'd love for you guys to unmute and share or put it in the chat, but how are you currently using data? What's working well for you? And what are you still wondering about at this point?
Can you hear me?
I can, Crystal, yeah.
So in our school, we are using, we're running like a student involvement data. So we're running attendance by grading period, and then the average for the semester. We're looking at GPA, failing grades, and participation in any type of extracurriculars, so sports and after school clubs. And then making sure of like where students are, raising their grades, having, really keeping track. I'm in a middle school, so it's not usually something that they keep track of grades and stuff to be eligible, but we are truly doing that and going through it. And then I'm looking at the failing students in both math and English. And making sure that they have some sort of remediation or intervention, as well as looking at our NWEA scores and our iLearn checkpoints, just to make sure that we're making progress. But we're at the point now where, like, okay, we see what's not working or where our students need support, and we're kind of stumped on where to go from here.
You mean like interventions or?
Yeah, like interventions and such. And then like making sure that like the data that we're collecting is like everything is done with fidelity. Like, are these inflated grades or not? Or, what is it? Are they just missing work and we're not getting it turned in? Or are we truly behind? Because we see a lot of apathy in middle school when there's not like a way to just kind of like keep them back because they haven't passed their classes.
Yeah, and that's definitely a lot. I mean, you guys are looking at a lot of data, so that's amazing, but I'm assuming it's also overwhelming. And so we're going to talk about this in a minute, but there's like supplemental data and like data that's not hard numbers that might help inform what's actually going on. Anybody else? Let's see. Using data with MTSS, making sure you're doing it as effectively as possible. And it does get overwhelming, right? So again, narrowing down exactly what you're looking at, whether it's just failing grades, whether it's just attendance, because it does get overwhelming because there's so much and it's hard to keep track of it all if data is not something that you're really excited about.
Hi, I'm Laura. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
One thing I tracked and I'm going to do it for the rest of the year. We just had our report cards go out, and I started tracking which class are students getting the lowest grades in by grade level. And that was kind of interesting data. And I think it's going to help us focus on like how are those classes being taught? What are the standards we're using in there? And it was just an interesting data point.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, that it sometimes gets down to a teacher, or in in the middle school I was at, it was a team. Like a lot of the grades or failing grades were from one team. And yes, Cammie, I get it. Like I was, when I was an elementary counselor, of course, I was the sole counselor, and it's hard when you're the only person. What things that I used to do is I literally would calendar a day to look at data, like no classroom lessons, no meetings, do not come and bother me unless literally school is burning down, or, risk of harm to student. And I would just sit and kind of just look through the data that I had and try to organize myself. So if that's possible, hopefully you can find time to do that. And then I'm just reading Nicole's. So many sources of data, and challenge how to present it to others. Yes. Again, so as much as you can just narrow on one thing at a time, do that, because it does get overwhelming to think about all of the things to look at. And then tracking social emotional growth. Yeah, it's not quite as easy to do either. Okay. So one thing that I found that was helpful for me, again, I knew kids were failing. I knew kids weren't coming to school. I knew kids were in the office, but I wasn't exactly sure why. So trying to find the root cause. So for attendance specifically, Attendance Works, if you've never been there, it's a great resource, but they talk about the different reasons that kids don't come to school, between barriers. So families don't have transportation, there's food insecurity, they have to stay home because mom has to work, things like that. Violent and unsafe neighborhoods where they don't feel safe leaving their homes to get to school. And then we have aversions where, the school's not a welcome place for them. They may have an undiagnosed learning disability or some other barrier to learning that makes them not want to come to school. Their caregivers have had negative experiences with the education, so they're not placing a priority or not, pushing back when kids want to stay home. Kids might be disengaged. So again, they're not connected with some of those resources and some of those extracurricular activities that we know kids need to be connected to the school. For the high schoolers, work schedules. I can remember the one year I was at the high school, some kids got paid a ton of money working jobs. And so why do I need to come to school when I already have this amazing job with amazing pay? They may not be connected to adults in the school, right? Not feeling like adults care about them or want to see them. And so they're kind of disengaged for that. Or your school's not culturally inclusive. And then there's those misconceptions, it doesn't matter if my kindergartner doesn't come to school, he's little, or, attendance doesn't really count until you get to high school, or I have to stay home no matter what's wrong with me. If I'm sniffling, it doesn't matter, however, whatever it is, I just need to stay home, or not even considering about how suspensions tie into attendance. So just making sure that we're thinking broadly about what's really the root cause, because if we were to do an intervention for students that aren't coming to school, can you think of one intervention that would meet every single one of these root causes? And the answer is probably not. And if you can, you are probably going to be a millionaire, because somebody can take that and run with it. But some other things that I used to kind of uncover root cause or give me a little more supplemental data were student risk screening scale. So I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a needs assessment for like a whole school screener that I used to pass out to all of my teachers. And I'll show it a little bit later. But it was a quick, easy way to see, like for behavior specifically, what are internalizing behaviors and what are externalizing behaviors that the teacher is observing. Minute meetings. I used to do those all the time, as often as possible. I did that elementary school, but at the middle school, right before we got the school closed down again for COVID, I was doing minute meetings with all of my 8th graders. So it's a great way to connect with the students and also just get a little information about what's going on with them literally in a minute, and then I could follow up on later. 5 whys, which is which is linked here is literally just asking why. It was developed by the owner or the founder of Toyota in order for him to identify how to make the process of making his cars more economical. So it's literally asking why. Kids aren't coming to school. Why? Whatever the answer is, why? Asking it at least 5 times until you think you get to a point where you've uncovered the true root cause. For those of you that have access to Panorama, that is a great tool as well. For those of you that don't, all of their questions are open access. You can go into their website and download all of their questions and make up your own assessment, which I kind of did sometimes. The strengths and difficulties questionnaire I use, it's usually better to use on an individual basis, but it's available in lots and lots of different languages and for different age levels, from children to adolescents, and also for caregivers and staff. So you get information from all points of view. The short grit scale is literally just a handful of questions, I think maybe 7. And that's really related to students being able to persevere and also persevere in post-secondary options. And then, of course, Sabres. I know Sabres is a paid thing somewhere, but you can get the paper form for free to use. So all of those are linked there if you want to take some time to look into that later. And then once I was able to, again, figure out what my attendance achievement and behavior data was telling me, do some root cause analysis to find out exactly what the issue was, whether they're not connected with the school, whether they don't care about coming to school, whether they have some barriers. I had identified those students in a manageable group, right? I did identify my resources available. What space do I have? Do I have a room that I could do groups in? Do I have a space that I could do a large group activity in? Do I have any curriculum, or do I have time to make up my own curriculum? I also had to get support from my building admin. So of course, making sure that they clear the way for me, gain support from teachers, because I want them to let their students out of their classrooms to do this work with me. And by doing that, I have to let them know what's in it for them, right? You're having these behavior issues in your classroom. Let me have this group of kids during your class period time, and I will work on making those behaviors decrease. And then, of course, you have to gain support from families. So that's the informed consent piece, making sure they know what you want to do, why you're doing it, what's going on, whether you need to get a signature or just do an opt-out consent is probably up to your schools. And then something that sometimes gets missed is gaining support from students, right? Even though they are not old enough to give informed consent, we should get their informed assent, right? Making sure they know what the purpose of the group is, making sure they know what we plan to do and what the outcomes are, and getting them as on board as possible, because it's difficult to work with students that don't want to be there. And then just deliver your intervention and have fun. I noticed for me, the thing, if I was trying to stick really closely to a lesson plan or to a group plan and not being flexible, it just wasn't fun. And so when you're doing a small groups, especially, and working with small groups of students, you just need to be flexible as possible while still trying to meet those outcomes, because the more fun you have, more flexible you are, the more you can engage authentically with your students, the better outcomes you will end up having. So some intervention resources, there is a lot out there. I've used most of these, and the ones that I included because they're free. So attendance works we talked about before. A lot of information, especially adult-facing information about the importance of attendance and how we can, help families understand why that's important. Intervention Central, I haven't used quite as much, but a lot of information on there that's free. PBIS World, I love. You go in and kind of click on the issue or the concern that you're having. It asks you a bunch of questions about what you've done already, and it gives you tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suggestions for interventions. Missouri has their own curriculum. Washington State has some career guidance curriculum. C-SCORE, which is through, I want to say Stanford, but that could be wrong, has some free resources. Stanford Harmony is a free emotional learning curriculum for any high school counselors that are here. SCORE has a free senior college seminar, which I love because it breaks it down to the amount of time that you have. So if you have 10 minutes to do a lesson or an intervention, it tells you what to do. If you have 20 minutes, it gives you extra things. If you have 30 minutes, you have more. So it covers everything that they need to know, from paying for college, what college is, the different types of post-secondary options. Wisconsin Office of Mental Health, Every Monday Matters is a newer one that I started looking at for SEL, free resources as well. And then therapist aid, especially for those students that you're working on, things like solution focused or changing their irrational thoughts and beliefs. There's a ton of worksheets and videos and just resources to use when you're working with students in that way. So again, later take some time to kind of look through those and see what might be helpful for you. So with that all being said, talking about, changing students' attitudes, skills, and knowledge, sometimes it's not a kid issue. Sometimes it's a systems issue or a teacher issue or something like that. So the student risk screening scale that I talked about a little bit earlier, this is kind of what it looks like. You would send out this spreadsheet to your classroom teachers. They fill it in, and it highlights where there is elevated risk or elevated behaviors in the classroom. So we know from MTSS that above a tier 1 level, you shouldn't have more than about 15% of your students needing more support. And so if you see something like this, where almost every single student has elevated needs, that to me, when I saw that from some of my teachers, told me that wasn't a kid issue. That told me I needed to talk to my administrator to try and get some coaching and support for this teacher, because either they're having a hard time managing behaviors, or maybe they have some prejudices and biases about their students in their classrooms. And personally, when I saw this in my school, it was a combination of both, right? They weren't able to effectively manage the students' behaviors, and they had some troubling beliefs about their students and why they behaved the way they did. So it would have been irresponsible for me and unethical of me to go in and say, I need to choose these students for an intervention and change them and tell them that they need to do something different when it's truly the teacher that needed the support. Doesn't mean I didn't talk with the students at all or support them at all, but it changed from how do you change to how can I support you and give you some coping skills and some skills to manage when we're working with people that may not see us in the way that we see ourselves. The other thing to be aware of, especially for our students, especially when you're leaving or working in schools that maybe Title I schools or schools that have higher student needs, are social determinants of health. I'm not sure if you have heard of these before, but these are all the non-medical issues that relate to physical and mental well-being. And these are things that students can't control, but do show up in attendance, do show up in achievement and behavior. So they can't control like the access they have to education or that their caregivers have had access to. They can't control the access they have to healthcare and the quality of that. They can't control where they're living, whether it's a safe environment. They can't control whether they have a supportive community or have a social place in that community and in their schools. And they can't control the academics the economics of their family. They can't control how much money their families get paid. And so we need to think about that as well, especially because these things are all related. The education level of families directly relates to their health care, where they can live, and their economic stability. So all of these things need to be thought of, again, when we're looking at students' needs, because we don't want to try and treat the student when it's the system that needs help. And then, of course, I'm sure everybody's heard of ACEs. I mean, that is definitely the big buzz in schools right now. And as I said, I have the certificate in applied educational neuroscience, which is focused on trauma and adversity. I choose to not use trauma much anymore just because it is more of a buzzword and people tend to not consider trauma unless it's like the big T trauma, like witnessing or experiencing some horrific event, which is kind of what they talked about in the original ACEs study, those 10 ACEs, depression or family depression, domestic violence, abuse, incarcerated family members, things like that. We know now that trauma is not just those big 10 items. It is a lot of different things. It is things that happen in the community. So you're seeing echoes of the social determinants of health, right? Living in poverty, having food scarcity, not having good jobs, living in unsafe neighborhoods, historical trauma, racism, and then we have those environmental things, which we're seeing much more of with weather events and climate crises that kind of displace people from their homes and make them feel unsafe. And the reason this is important to think of is because it was kind of framed to me in this way, like when we talk about trauma and big traumatic events, that's kind of likened to when you have maybe a water pipe burst in your house, right? It's a huge event. It's very messy, but usually you can catch it quickly and fix it and things are okay. Versus when you have a slow leak in a pipe in your walls, you don't notice it for a long time. It goes on for a long time or an extended period of time. And you don't notice it until maybe you start feeling ill and you start opening walls and see like all of the black mold everywhere. So like chronic stress and adversity, the low levels of stress that happens over a long period of time tend to be a little more disruptive. And those are the things that kind of impact long-term mental and physical health. So again, thinking about that from your students' perspectives, what is their living situation? What maybe historical traumas do they have they had? The other thing to think about that many people don't consider is that you may have some students that have no signs of trauma at all. And the reason to be aware of that is trauma is genetic. So if you've ever heard of epigenetics, trauma literally changes the structure of your DNA and it's passed on to your offspring. And this was kind of found, I always find this fascinating. This was found in an experiment done quite a while ago. They took mice, piped in the smell of apple blossoms, and at the same time gave them electrical shocks, which of course is very traumatizing. So they associated the electrical shocks with the smell of apple blossoms. They bred the mice, took their pups, removed them from the parents, and then just exposed the pups to the smell of apple blossoms, and they responded as if they had been shocked themselves. So that's just proof that trauma doesn't need to happen to the individual. If it happened to parents, it could possibly be passed on down to them. So again, making sure that we're thinking about it from all perspectives. So we're not trying to fix a kid when it's really not the kid that maybe needs fixing. It's something else. So thinking of that, when it's not a kid issue, that changes, again, what we're doing. So we might be doing some more structured interventions with coping skills and maybe asset mapping, like figuring out what some positives are about their culture and their community that we can help build some strength-based things. But also a lot of this is advocacy, and as school counselors, really that's what we're charged to do, is be advocates for systems change. But again, we need to be aware of ourselves and make sure that we're not doing more harm. And so you have to be careful about how are you doing it and not just run in and do it. And so really the first thing that you need to do as school counselors is explore your biases, your background, your social location, right? How did you grow up? What does your culture look like? Because we need to be aware of what we're bringing to it and making sure that we're not imposing our culture on other people. We also need to examine what we think we know about the groups that we're advocating for, right? Because what we think we know might not be accurate. Once we think we have a good handle on ourselves and the people that we're trying to advocate for, we have to find those helpful relationships. Advocacy is a tough job, especially when people don't want to listen to what you're saying. So you want to find some allies, find some people that can either support you or can work with you and do this work with you. Do an advocacy plan, right? Map out what you're going to do. Because if you go in guns blazing, like I have done in the past, you're not going to get far. You're just probably going to tick people off. Then you implement your plan, figure out if it worked. If it didn't, kind of regroup and do it again. So this, I have linked here. It's kind of a worksheet for you to kind of work through an advocacy plan if this is something that you think you need to do or would want to do. I presented this with, I don't know if any of you know Anna Sutter. She's a previous school counselor in Indianapolis. But it's a good worksheet to kind of help you work through this planning phase of advocating for your students and for your families. So went through a lot of stuff, shared a lot of resources on those previous slides. I'm just curious, what is a resource or tool that you think you want to try? What additional information or supports do you think you need? And if you want, you can go ahead and go back to some of those previous slides and kind of click into some of those resources. So I know slide 11 had some tools for root cause. And then slide, I think 13 had those intervention resources. Sam, like the advocacy model. What else are you guys seeing? Or what did you see or hear that you might like to try, might like more information on? Yeah, Panorama is great. And like I said, I think it's expensive if your district wants to actually use it the way it's intended with the dashboard and everything, but you can get in and access all of the questions for free. Yes, I agree, Libby. PBS World is amazing. Anything else? Okay, Jackie's saying interested in minute meetings, being the only counselor and worrying that they would miss a child. And so I did link, I think, to the Keep Indiana Learning or the Counselor Connect site, one of those two. Anyways, it's the Indiana specific one that has some resources for minute meetings. But literally, I asked 5 questions, and it would vary depending on your grade level. But how do you feel about school? How do you feel about your friends? How do you feel about your teachers? Is there one adult, at least one adult in the building you can talk to? And then my last question, is there anything that you want me to talk with you about later? So it was really quick. I would sit outside the classrooms and have kids come out one at a time. I would make sure that the teachers were okay with it, of course, ahead of time. But it was really quick, easy way to get to touch base with every single student and get an idea of where I need to go next. Any other questions?
Angie, I think my struggle always was if I gathered data like that from a large group of students, then if the response was overwhelming, like they all wanted follow up, I had a hard time following through on all of that. And it was almost like I had too much information, as the only counselor for that cohort, it would be tough to do that.
Yeah. And so that's a good point. So before you do something like that is kind of assessing your capacity. So if you think the need is going to be so great and you're not going to have capacity for that, maybe start with what I used to do. Like the first time I did it, I started with the results of my student risk screening scale, and I would just meet with the students that had the elevated risk. So that kind of narrowed that down. But I also found a lot of times that because of the questions that I asked, the ones that I felt like I needed to follow up with quickly are like, do you want to meet with me to talk about anything specifically? I rarely got kids that said yes. So that was easy to do. And then the other things, like the ones that didn't feel positively about their teachers or about school or didn't have friends, I used that to group them into small groups. So I didn't feel the need to do it right away, but I would have a plan. Like, I know I'm going to do small groups, and it's going to be based on this data.
That's a good idea. And I probably was asking the question the wrong way, you know, the wording probably needed to adjust that a little bit.
Yeah. And the other way I made it easy is I would ask those 4 questions I would ask on Likert scales. And especially for my littles, I would have a visual of a Likert scale so they could just point to the smiley face. And made it really easy. I would put everything into a Google form, and it went quick. Any other thoughts or anything that questions that I didn't cover that maybe I could share that information with you later, like in a follow-up email or something? Because I know there's a ton of stuff. I could have gone down many rabbit holes. So I just did a broad overview. So if there's anything else that you might want more specific information on, let me know. Thank you, Libby. Do you want to go through these last slides?
Yeah, so you can get a PGP for today. So it's typically an hour of professional development would be 1 PGP. So you could get one for today. And I'll put that in the chat so you can just easily click on it. But you can go ahead and do that. So I think it asks you a couple questions and then it will email the PGP to you. You can go to the next one. So we just want to tell you about some more upcoming events from Counselor Connect and Keep Indiana Learning. So the next coffee talk is happening very soon. And it looks like we're having a guest from Purdue University Northwest. And this guest will be talking about college planning for undocumented students. So again, that's free. We also have preparing students to own their future success. And that is also from Counselor Connect, and that's on November 19th. We have another session from the Spotlight on Legal series, and that's going to be December 11th. And that is all about child find and parent permission around screeners and assessments. And then I'm doing a session that does cost, but it's very inexpensive. And that is called Enhancing Cultural Competency in School Counseling. That's coming up in December 9th. And then we have another counselor coffee talk, December 11th. And that one is all about the high school diploma redesign with Flora Jones from the IDOE. So we have a lot coming up. It's all free or very affordable. But if there's a topic that you think is missing from our offerings from Counselor Connect, please let us know, because we try to base our professional development offerings based on needs assessments. So please reach out if you need anything else. And then if you want to go to the next one, yep, I really want to alert you to this because it's amazing. It's the Indiana School Counseling Curriculum Library, which was developed using grant funds. And it is just a free library of lesson plans. And it includes academic, career, and social emotional development for K-12. Really check it out. There's some really good stuff in there. And then there's also the 2024-2025 calendar with some just like important dates to keep on your radar for school counselors and student service professionals. And the last one here, if you have any questions, Angie put her email address on the slides and in the chat, and then feel free to reach out to me and Amanda. We would love to hear from you. So thank you so much. I was recording today, so I will send out the slides and the recording here later today.
Thanks, everybody. And like I said, feel free